The Maldives were everything the brochures promised. Turquoise lagoons, powdery white sand, and sunsets so vibrant they felt like paintings come to life. For most people, this would be paradise. For me, it was supposed to be a hard-earned escape. After years of financial planning, I'd finally whisked my aging parents off on a dream vacation to thank them for decades of love, sacrifices, and guidance. My father, Walter, had worked grueling factory shifts most of his life, while my mother, Margaret, juggled 3 part-time jobs just to put me through school. They deserve this. We'd just returned from a snorkeling session near the coral reef when my phone buzzed on the deck of our overwater villa. Barefoot in dripping salt water, I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. It was a message from Evan, my son. "Dad, I need to talk to you when you're back. It's important. Please don't tell Mom." The words hit like a rogue wave, knocking the breath out of me. Evan wasn't one for dramatic texts. At 24, he was reserved to the point of infuriating. If something was truly bothering him, he'd sit on it for weeks before opening up. This message felt off, urgent, almost desperate. "What's wrong, Michael?" Margaret asked from her deck chair, lowering her paperback. "Just a text from Evan," I said, forcing a smile. Nothing urgent, but it felt urgent. I pocketed the phone and joined them at the villa's dining table for a late lunch. The chef served fresh seafood, perfectly grilled, with tropical fruit salads and champagne flutes of mango juice. Walter beamed as he bit into a skewer of shrimp. "This is living," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Long overdue?" I replied, raising my glass. But the text lingered in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't ignore. I tried calling Evan, but it went straight to voicemail. That evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, I called Laura, my wife. She picked up after a few rings, her voice clipped. "Hey," she said, "how's paradise?" "It's beautiful," I said, trying to gauge her tone. "You'd love it. Wish you were here." Her laugh was faint. "I don't do well with too much sun, remember?" That was true enough, but something about her felt distant. I mentioned the snorkeling, the gourmet meals, the dolphins we saw near the shore. She listened, chiming in here and there, but the warmth I expected wasn't there. "Is everything okay back home?" I asked. "Of course," she said quickly. "Just busy. You know how it is." It was a perfunctory answer. I decided against mentioning Evan's message, though it nagged at me. If there was a problem, she'd know, wouldn't she? The next morning, I woke before dawn and went for a walk along the beach. The resort was still quiet, with only the soft rustle of palm fronds and the gentle lap of waves to break the silence. I replayed Evan's text in my mind, dissecting every word. What could he mean? Over the years, I'd prided myself on being a present father. When Evan was little, I was the one who coached his soccer team and stayed up late helping with science projects. Even when work got demanding, I made it home for dinner almost every night. But then came the teenage years, and with them a subtle shift. He became more independent, more private. That was normal, I told myself. Boys grow up, fathers step back. Still, I'd always thought we were close enough for him to come to me with anything. So, why the secrecy now? And why keep Laura in the dark? Later that day, as Walter and Margaret dozed in lounge chairs by the pool, I checked my phone again. A second message from Evan had come through. "I'm sorry, Dad. I think you already know." My chest tightened. What the hell is he talking about? I stared at the screen, my mind racing. If this was about money, why the secrecy? If it was a relationship issue, why not confide in Laura? No, that wasn't possible. My thoughts flickered back to a moment 6 months ago. We'd hosted a barbecue at home, inviting friends and family over for burgers and beers. I remembered walking into the kitchen and finding Laura and Evan standing too close, her hand on his arm, his eyes averted. It was a split-second interaction, easily dismissed at the time, but now it replayed in my mind with fresh intensity. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, listening to the rhythmic sound of the waves outside, I debated calling Laura. Should I confront her? Demand answers? Or was I overthinking everything? At 3 a.m., I gave up and stepped out onto the villa's deck. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the water. My father's words from earlier that day echoed in my mind. Asterisk, trust is everything in a marriage, son. Lose that, and you've got nothing. Asterisk. I stared at my phone, Evan's messages staring back at me. The pieces didn't fit, but the edges were sharp enough to cut. And for the first time since arriving in paradise, I felt completely alone. The next day in paradise felt anything but serene. Every beautiful sight, the cerulean waves, the vibrant reef fish darting beneath the villa, seemed like an insult to the storm brewing inside me. I'd always prided myself on being rational, steady. In my corporate job, people leaned on me for calm decision-making, even in the most chaotic moments. But now, my head was a mess. As I sat with my parents over breakfast, sipping coffee and pretending to enjoy the fresh papaya, I scrolled through my phone obsessively, waiting for Evan to respond. "You're awfully distracted," Margaret said, giving me one of her knowing looks. "Work," I lied, forcing a weak smile. "You know how it is? You're on vacation, Michael," Walter said gruffly. "If the world can't spin without you for a week, that's their problem." I nodded, pretending to take his advice, but my mind was elsewhere. Evan hadn't replied to my last attempt to call him. And Laura's abruptness during our conversations lingered like an itch I couldn't scratch. Something was wrong, and my imagination was filling the silence with all the wrong possibilities. That afternoon, while Walter and Margaret attended a yoga session, I sat alone on the villa's deck, staring out at the endless expanse of ocean. I opened my phone and scrolled through Laura's recent texts to me. They were sparse. A quick asterisk, "How are your parents holding up?" Asterisk here. A asterisk, "Don't forget to take pictures." Asterisk there. The tone was light, but it wasn't her. Laura was a dynamic woman. Even after 20 years of marriage, she had a sharp wit that could light up a room and a way of making the most mundane things seem exciting. But lately, our conversations had become mechanical, transactional. I thumbed over to her social media. Her latest post was a picture of our golden retriever, Max, sprawled on the couch at home. The caption read, "Lazy Sundays with this guy." The comments were the usual. Friends cooing over the dog, her sister asking if Max was still sneaking food off the counters. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Yet the growing weight in my chest told me otherwise. By late afternoon, my need for answers outweighed my desire to preserve the illusion of a relaxing vacation. I called Evan again, and this time he picked up. "Dad." His voice was tentative, like he was bracing himself. "Evan," I said, trying to sound calm. "What's going on?" "What do I already know?" There was a pause. A long one. "It's complicated," he said finally. Complicated. I hated that word. It was what people said when they didn't want to tell you the truth. Complicated how? I pressed. Another pause. "I think it's better if we talk when you're home. Evan, I'm 9,000 miles away, and you've been dropping cryptic messages for 2 days. You're not going to brush me off with a 'we'll talk later.' Spit it out." "I can't," he said, his voice cracking. I don't even know where to start." The fear in his voice was palpable. My heart raced. "Does this have something to do with your mom?" I asked, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. Evan went silent, and that silence was louder than anything he could have said. "Evan," my voice was sharper now, almost a growl. "Answer me." I have to go," he stammered. "I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand, my chest heaving. My mind was a jumble of fragmented memories and questions I didn't want to answer. The barbecue 6 months ago. The late-night errands Laura had started running. Evan's sudden interest in staying home for dinner when Laura was cooking. Was I crazy? Was I reading into things that weren't there? Or had I been blind to something that everyone else would have seen immediately? That evening, as Walter and Margaret played cards on the deck, I retreated to my room and opened my laptop. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard. I felt foolish, paranoid even, but I had to know. I logged into our shared phone plans account and pulled up the call logs. Scrolling through Laura's recent activity, I noticed a pattern. The same number appearing again and again at odd hours. Late at night, early in the morning. It wasn't saved in her contacts. I copied the number and pasted it into a search engine. Nothing. But something about the frequency of the calls gnawed at me. I scrolled further back, scanning the timestamps. The calls had started roughly a year ago. My hands shook as I stared at the screen. I told myself it could be nothing. A coworker. A friend. But why hadn't she mentioned it? And why had I never noticed until now? I closed the laptop and sat back, my pulse hammering in my ears. My parents' laughter drifted in from the deck, a stark contrast to the chaos inside me. I needed to confront Laura. But how? Over the phone, with half the planet between us? Or should I wait until I was home, face to face, where she couldn't deflect or hang up? And then there was Evan. Whatever he knew, it was tearing him apart. I poured myself a glass of whiskey from the minibar and stepped out onto the deck. The ocean was calm, the stars scattered like diamonds across the night sky. It was a perfect evening in paradise. But inside, my world was falling apart. The Maldives, with its postcard-perfect views and tranquil waters, felt like a cruel backdrop to the storm in my mind. I sat in the corner of the deck that evening, sipping my second, or maybe third whiskey. My parents were inside, watching some lighthearted rom-com, but their laughter barely reached me. Evan's silence after his cryptic call had left me shaken. The weight of his words, "I'm so sorry, Dad, sat heavy on my chest. My thoughts kept circling back to Laura, the subtle shifts in her behavior, and that number on the call log. I dismissed so many moments in the past year as harmless quirks. The late nights out with friends, the sudden yoga classes she'd joined without a shred of interest before, the way she'd stopped asking about our joint finances. And then there was that moment 6 months ago at the barbecue. The fleeting touch, the lingering glance. I wanted to believe it was all in my head, but the evidence was stacking up, and it pointed to something I couldn't ignore any longer. The next morning, I made the decision to confront Evan again. I couldn't wait for him to gather the courage to tell me on his own. If there was a truth lurking beneath the surface, I needed it now. After breakfast, I excused myself from Walter and Margaret and went for a walk along the shoreline, phone in hand. The resort was waking up, couples strolling hand in hand, children splashing in the shallows. I envied their obliviousness. I dialed Evan. It rang twice before he picked up. "Dad," he said, his voice low and strained. "Evan," I began, trying to keep my voice steady, "we're not doing this dance again. You're going to tell me what's going on, and you're going to do it now." "Dad, I can't." "You can." My tone was firmer now, sharper. "I don't care how bad it is. I deserve the truth. You owe me that." There was a long silence. I heard him take a shaky breath. "It's Mom," he said finally. My grip on the phone tightened. "What about her?" He hesitated, his voice trembling when he finally spoke. "We've been seeing each other." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. "What did you just say?" I whispered. "Dad, No, my voice cracked, a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Say it again." Out loud. We've been having an affair," he said, barely audible. "I didn't mean for it to happen, Dad. It just did." My knees buckled, and I sank onto a nearby rock. The phone pressed to my ear, as if his words had physically struck me. "You and your mother?" I said, my voice shaking. "Do you even hear yourself right now?" "Dad, please. Don't you dare." My mind reeled, images flashing like a slideshow of betrayal. Laura's laughter, Evan's awkward glances, the way she'd suddenly started looking younger, more vibrant. "How long?" I demanded, my voice rising. There was a pause, as if he couldn't bring himself to answer. "A year," he said finally. I let out a bitter laugh, the kind that escapes when pain turns into something sharper. "A year," I repeated, "and I didn't see it. I trusted both of you, and you," my voice broke. "Dad, I'm so sorry," Evan said, his voice cracking. "I never wanted this to happen. I didn't mean to hurt you." "You didn't mean to?" My anger surged like a tidal wave. "You think that makes it better? You think saying sorry erases the fact that you've been sleeping with my wife? Your mother." "She's not my mother," he said, his voice rising now, defensive. It was true. Laura wasn't Evan's biological mother. She'd been my second wife, marrying me when Evan was 8. But she'd raised him, been there for him through every scraped knee and failed exam. The distinction felt meaningless in the face of their betrayal. She might as well be. I shouted. You grew up under the same roof. You're my son. She's my wife. Do you even understand what you've done? I love her, he said softly. The words cut deeper than I thought possible. Don't you dare use that word, I hissed. You don't get to twist this into something noble. Dad, please just... I hung up, my hand trembling. For the rest of the day, I was a ghost. My parents noticed immediately. You're quiet today, Margaret said as we lounged by the pool. Just tired, I muttered, avoiding her gaze. Walter gave me a sharp look, the kind he used to give when I was a teenager trying to hide something. He didn't press, though. Inside, I was anything but quiet. My mind replayed Evan's confession on an endless loop. Every word, every pause, every moment of hesitation twisted the knife deeper. I thought about Laura, the way she'd kissed me goodbye before this trip, her hand lingering on my cheek. Was she thinking of him then? Of the son she'd taken into our home and turned into her lover? I wanted to confront her immediately, to call her and demand answers. But what could I say? I wasn't ready to hear her excuses, her lies. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every sound, the rustle of palm leaves, the distant crash of waves, felt amplified, oppressive. I tried to picture what I'd do when I got home, how I'd face them both. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make sense of it. The two people I trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. And I wasn't sure I'd ever recover. The next morning in the Maldives dawned in muted golds and soft blues, but I barely noticed. Sleep had been a stranger, and when I did drift off, I dreamed of shadows, Laura's laughter echoing, Evan's face clouded with guilt, and myself standing on the edge of an abyss, unable to move. Walter and Margaret had gone to explore the island, giving me some much-needed solitude. I sat on the edge of the villa's deck, staring at the calm waters that stretched endlessly toward the horizon. I couldn't stop myself. I had to call Laura. The phone rang longer than usual before she picked up. "Michael," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "Hey, how's the trip?" I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to remain calm. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice tight. "Wish you were here?" She laughed lightly, but it sounded forced. "I told you, I just burn in the sun. I'm much better off here." I could hear the faint hum of background noise. TV, maybe, or the radio. The normalcy of it made me want to scream. "Laura," I said abruptly, cutting through the small talk. "We need to talk." Her tone shifted immediately. "What's wrong?" I spoke to Evan. Silence. The pause stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. "Laura," I pressed. "Did you hear me?" I talked to Evan. What did he say?" Her voice was shaky now, the lightness gone. "Why don't you tell me?" I said, my words sharp and deliberate. "Tell me why my son is apologizing to me for sleeping with my wife." The gasp on the other end of the line was audible. "Michael, Don't you dare deny it," I snapped, my voice rising. "He told me everything, Laura. Everything." Her voice faltered, then steadied. "Michael, please let me explain." "Explain?" I laughed bitterly. "How do you explain something like this, Laura? You've been carrying on with Evan for a year, behind my back. I trusted you. I trusted both of you." "Michael, it wasn't like that," she said, her voice breaking. "It's complicated." I interrupted. "Don't you dare tell me it's complicated. It's disgusting. It's betrayal. My voice cracked, and I had to take a moment to breathe. "You weren't there," she said suddenly, her tone defensive. "You were always working late, always distracted." I was lonely, Michael. I felt invisible. I froze. "So that's your excuse?" I said, my voice low. "You were lonely, so you turned to my son?" "It wasn't like that at first," she said, her words spilling out now. "He was there for me, Michael. He listened. He cared. And then, I don't know. It just happened. It just happened?" I repeated, incredulous. "Do you hear yourself? Do you realize how insane that sounds?" She was crying now, the sound muffled through the phone. "I never meant for it to go this far. I swear, Michael, I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" I echoed, my voice rising again. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" You've destroyed this family, Laura. You've destroyed me. I love him, she whispered. The words felt like a knife twisting in my gut. You don't know what love is, I said coldly. I hung up before she could say anything else, my hands trembling as I set the phone down on the table. The air felt too thick, the weight of her words pressing down on me like a vice. I'd expected denial, maybe excuses. But her admission, her love for Evan, was more than I could bear. For the rest of the day, I wandered the island aimlessly, my mind a chaotic mess of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. Every time I thought I'd reached the bottom, another memory or detail would surface, dragging me further down. I thought about Evan as a child, his boundless energy, the way he used to run to me with scraped knees, trusting me to make everything better. And Laura, standing beside me at our wedding, promising to honor and cherish me until death. Had they thought about me at all? Or had I become some background figure in their story, an afterthought to their twisted relationship? That night, back at the villa, I stared out at the ocean, my parents asleep inside. My phone buzzed, breaking the heavy silence. It was Evan. For a long moment, I considered ignoring it. But then I thought about the years I'd spent raising him, the love I'd poured into him, and I picked up. "Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know you're mad." "Mad doesn't begin to cover it," I said, my voice like ice. "Please," he said, "just hear me out. I need you to understand." "Understand?" I repeated. "You've already said enough, Evan. You've said everything I need to know." "I didn't mean for this to happen," he said, his voice trembling. "I never wanted to hurt you. I swear, Dad, I didn't plan any of this. And yet here we are," I said bitterly. "You betrayed me, Evan. You betrayed your own father. Do you have any idea what that feels like?" "I know," he said quietly. "I know I've messed up. I've ruined everything. But I love her, Dad. I can't help how I feel." I closed my eyes, my chest heaving. "Love," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You call this love? Do you even know what that word means?" There was silence on the other end of the line. "You've destroyed everything," I said finally. "Our family, our trust, all of it. For what? For some twisted fantasy? Dad!" "No," I said sharply. "Don't call me that. You lost the right to call me that the moment you slept with my wife." I hung up before he could respond, throwing the phone onto the bed like it had burned me. For the first time since arriving in the Maldives, I allowed myself to cry. Not just for what I'd lost, but for the man I'd become. A husband whose wife turned to his own son. A father who failed to see the warning signs until it was too late. The paradise around me felt like a mockery now, its beauty a cruel reminder of everything I no longer had. By the time I returned home, the Maldives felt like a distant dream, a cruel mirage that had dissolved into nothingness. The flight back was long and torturous. Walter and Margaret, sensing my tension, tried to fill the silence with idle chatter, but I barely heard them. My mind was already at home, standing on the precipice of the confrontation I couldn't avoid. When I walked through the door of our house, the air was heavy, as if the walls themselves knew what had transpired within them. Laura was in the living room, sitting on the edge of the couch, her face pale and drawn. She must have heard the car pull up because she looked up the moment I entered. "Michael," she said softly, standing. "Don't," I said, holding up a hand. "Don't start." Her lips trembled as she stepped closer. "Please, let me explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, my voice echoing off the walls. "How you destroyed our family. How you turned my son into your lover. What could you possibly say to make any of this better, Laura?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt nothing. No pity, no compassion, just the cold, hard weight of betrayal. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said, her voice cracking. "I swear, Michael, I never." "But you did," I interrupted, my voice sharp and cutting. "You hurt me in the worst possible way. You hurt us." She sank back onto the couch, her head in her hands. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at her, the woman I'd built a life with, now a stranger I'd barely recognized. The front door opened suddenly, and I turned to see Evan standing there. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot. He froze when he saw me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Dad," he began, but I cut him off. You don't get to call me that, I said, my voice cold and steady. He flinched, and for a moment, I thought he might leave. But instead, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Please, he said, his voice shaking. Just let us explain. I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to my own ears. Explain? Oh, this should be good. Go ahead, Evan. Explain to me how you justified sleeping with your stepmother. The woman who raised you, who loved you, who... I love her, he blurted out, his voice desperate. I love her, Dad, and she loves me. I stared at him, the words hitting me like a physical blow. You have no idea what love is, I said, my voice trembling with fury. You think this is love? This betrayal? I didn't plan for this to happen, he said, his hands clenched in a fist at his sides. It just did. We didn't mean to hurt you, Dad. But you did, I said, stepping closer to him. You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed everything. Do you even realize that? Do you have any idea what you've done? Michael, please, Laura said from behind me, her voice pleading. Don't do this. I turned on her, my anger boiling over. Don't do what, Laura? Hold you accountable for your actions? Make you face the consequences of your lies. She flinched, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want this to happen. I didn't. Stop, I said, cutting her off. Just stop. I'm done listening to your excuses. The silence that followed was deafening. Evan stood there, his shoulders slumped, while Laura sobbed quietly on the couch. I felt like a stranger in my own home, surrounded by people I no longer recognized. You've both made your choices, I said finally, my voice cold and detached. Now you'll have to live with them. I turned and walked toward the stairs, but Evan called after me. Wait, he said, his voice cracking. Please, Dad, don't shut me out. We can fix this. We can fix this, I said, turning back to him. There's no fixing this, Evan. You and Laura destroyed everything we had. There's no coming back from that. Please, Laura said, standing now, her hands clasped in front of her. Michael, don't throw away everything we've built. I laughed bitterly. I'm throwing it away? You got some nerve, Laura. I shook my head, the weight of the past few days crashing down on me. I'm done, I said quietly. I'm done with both of you. I spent the night in a hotel, unable to stay in the house that no longer felt like home. The next morning, I called a lawyer. For weeks, the fallout consumed my life. I filed for divorce, cutting ties with Laura as quickly and cleanly as I could. Evan tried to reach out, leaving voicemail after voicemail, but I ignored them all. Walter and Margaret were devastated when I told them the truth. My father, always a man of few words, simply shook his head and said, I never thought I'd see the day. Margaret cried, her heartbreak palpable. You deserved better, she said, her voice trembling. You always deserved better. One night, a month later, I found myself back at the beach. Not in the Maldives, but a quiet stretch of sand near my new apartment. I sat alone, the sound of the waves filling the silence. I thought about everything I'd lost, my marriage, my family, the life I'd built, and wondered if I'd ever feel whole again. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I realized something. I was still standing. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to believe that I could rebuild. Returning to normal life was harder than I'd anticipated. The betrayal didn't fade. It lingered, a constant shadow in the corner of my mind. I filed for divorce, avoided Evan's calls, and buried myself in work. At night, the silence of my new apartment was deafening. Evan came to see me once. His face was pale, his voice trembling as he tried to explain himself. I know I can't fix this, he said, his hands clenched into fists. But I can't lose you, Dad. I stared at him, the boy I'd raised now a stranger in my own home. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said coldly. But I need time to figure out if I even want to try. He nodded, tears in his eyes, and left without another word. Laura emailed me weeks later, apologizing and seeking closure. I read her message once, then deleted it. Instead, I focused on myself. One quiet morning, I sat by the ocean, staring at the waves and letting the past wash over me. I wrote 2 letters that evening. To Evan. You're my son, and I can't erase that. I don't know if I'll ever forgive you, but I'm willing to try. Let's start with therapy. Together, asterisk. To Laura, I can't forgive you, but I won't let your choices define my future. I hope you find peace someday, asterisk. Sealing the letters, I felt a weight lift. I couldn't change what had happened, but I could decide how to move forward. As the sun rose the next morning, I realized I wasn't just surviving. I was starting to live again.